Hey guys, welcome to Boxing Squared for boxing news and views from around the internet. In this video, 3 different fights that I'll cover and some thoughts on the what next for the fighters involved. We're talking Victorvickers versus Iago Kaladze. You've got Gerald Washington versus Eren Demirezen. And then one of the prelim fights that was preceding the pay-per-view card that was topped by Luis Ortiz and Charles Martin. You had 2 unbeaten Cubans absolutely going hammer and tongs. Geovany, Bruzon and Lenier, Perro. So that was a cracking fight and we'll talk about it. But we'll start with the first fight on the pay-per-view card proper, which was Victorvickers, also called Victor Faust, and that's for reasons that it's easier to say. He's based in Germany now with EC Boxing, and actually EC Boxing featured heavily in this card. They had Christian Hammer up against Frank Sanchez, and besides Victorvickers, who's an EC Boxing fighter as well, you also had Eren Demirezen. So PBC really leaning into EC Boxing to sort of fill out this card. But Victorvickers opened things up with Iago Kaladze, and if you've seen Vykhryst before, also known as Victor Faust, as I mentioned, he was 8-0 coming into this. Not necessarily a huge puncher. He generally tends to like to box, and basically against the guys that he's fought, generally if he hasn't stopped them, he's boxed to a decision. But he's generally plays the percentages pretty sort of calculated with what he does. But this fight, it was absolutely the opposite of it. I wouldn't have called this in a million years. Literally a 2-round shootout, 5 knockdowns. So the first of which was Iago Kaladze getting dropped by a left hook, and then shortly afterwards down again. And at that point, the referee warned him, look, one more knockdown in the round and it's all over. And that basically woke Iago Kaladze up, and he caught Victorvickers with a counter shot, and Vykhryst just went all the way across the ring, staggering and into the ropes, and he was hurt, and hurt badly. And it did remind me somewhat of that sort of fight or flight sort of situation that Iago Kaladze tends to get into. When he gets hit and hurt, he comes out like a wounded animal and goes for it. We saw it against F.A. Ajagba, and he caught Ajagba napping, who was trying to finish him off, put him down. Similar case here, but he hurt Vykhryst worse than he hurt Ajagba, and it was a wild first round. So into round 2, I'm thinking, what's going to happen here? Is this a case we're going to see some sort of upset, or is Victorvickers going to play the script? Is it going to settle down? But it's actually Kaladze who drops Vykhryst again, another counter right hand, and he's down. And again, looks quite hurt, but he responds in kind, drops Iago Kaladze. And this is where it comes to the end of the fight and some controversy, because after Kaladze gets up, the referee's giving him a count, says, come to me. Kaladze stumbles a little bit. It wasn't like he was all over the place, but it was enough for the referee, Samuel Burgos, to go, that's it, waves it off. Iago Kaladze, incensed, absolutely incensed, actually throws a punch at the referee. Not sort of winding up and sort of just going for it, but it was a punch. It did, the love tap did clip Burgos on the chin. And then the referee said, what the F is wrong with you? Fight's over. And directs him off to his corner. So it could have blown up at that point, but cooler heads prevailed. Burgos got Kaladze to, shuffle off, and he left the ring immediately after that. But it was a wild fight to open the broadcast, and really enjoyed it. There was some value on this card. I mean, this is always a card tailor-made for a heavyweight boxing fan. 5 main fights on the pay-per-view portion, plus you had, the fight we'll come to next actually, you had Geovany, Bruzon, and also Lenier, Perro. And Perro coming into this, he had a bit of buzz and a bit of hype. He's a guy who got, I think it was the WBC Latino title, a minor regional belt, a guy with a lot of talent. Both these guys were undefeated Cubans, 5-0 for Perro, 6-0 for Bruzon. Bruzon somewhat unheralded because he's kind of been out of sight, out of mind. People hadn't seen this guy fight before, but this ended up being an absolute slugfest. And maybe lucky for Perro that it wasn't longer than 8 rounds, because he certainly was gassing in the second half of the fight. But we'll get to the start there. That one really opened up strong by Perro, who is a pretty slick operator. He moves well. He's got relatively good defense. He's a good puncher, good power, good pop on those shots, works the jabs, able to slip shots, work in counters, and he was countering Bruzon as well, landing some really nice body shots in those opening few rounds. And you sort of thought, yeah, Bruzon's being sort of outclassed here. What's going to happen? And he hurt Bruzon as well a few times in those early rounds. And it looked like, is this going to be some sort of a stoppage coming, or a procession where it's going to be 8-zip if it ends up going the distance? But Bruzon started to get back into the fight. From round 4, he really started to have some success landing to the body. And you could see that Perro was... The pace of the fight was just catching up with him a bit. Bruzon continued to go to the body in round 5. They were both ripping body shots. And Bruzon, this is where he probably rocked him the best in the fight. He hits him with a left hand, and it absolutely rocks him to his core. And you're thinking, okay, is going to be in a bit of trouble here? But Lenier Perro, who I do rate, I think he's a prospect to watch. I really hadn't sort of seen Bruzon before, and these guys were pairs in the Cuban system. They're known to each other, all that sort of stuff. Even in the pro ranks, apparently there is a sort of crossover with training relationships or something. There is a sort of link in, and it was an interesting sort of match to make. These guys, 5 and 6-0 respectively. The way this fight played out, because it was back and forth, rock and sock'em action, especially from rounds 4 to 8, really good back and forth action. At times it was seesawing Bruzon's sort of, way, and he sort of had the best of rounds, sort of 5 and 6, really got into the fight. I thought he closed it quite well. He had a big round, but it just wasn't enough. So ultimately, 77-75 on one scorecard, 78-74 on 2 others. So 6 rounds to 2 kind of underplays actually how competitive this was at times. I think 77-75, 5 rounds to 3. Yeah, Perro did his best work in the first half of the fight, and ultimately he, in my view, scored round 7, which basically clinched it for him on my card. I had it 5 rounds to 3, the same as 77-75. But very entertaining fight. I want to see more of both these guys. These guys walked out of the ring with their reputations enhanced. It was a good showcase fight for both of them. Even Bruzon, in the loss, actually did a lot for his stock. He's been basically fighting in obscurity. I think this sort of performance on a card like this, so this is the prelims into the main event, and so that was on regular Fox. That'll do wonders for both these guys and their profiles, because no one was talking about Geovany Bruzon before this, but a lot more people will know his name after this performance. Even in a loss, he showed a lot of heart, a lot of durability as well, took some punishment, but was able to soak it up. Especially, there was some hellacious body shots coming in from Lenier Perro, which, really was his calling card in this fight, the body work, and ultimately that was slowing Bruzon down just enough that he was able to sort of hold him off in the end. But some of that work, the body shots, absolutely vicious in there by Lenier Perro, who at 6-0 now after this win, I think he's a prospect on the rise. He's got a lot to offer, and this was a good showcase fight for him. A good showcase fight for both these guys. No one really lost in this one, even though Lenier Perro got the win. So I want to see both these guys again, and soon. And Bruzon, he will definitely find himself some work, and he probably would have beat some top 30 guys with the sort of way, the style, and his punching power, selection. He would have beaten some guys in that sort of top 30 to top 40 range just tonight. So he's still got a future in the heavyweight division. He can still, build away and come back and be in some decent fights. And it's up and up for Lenier Perro. So moving on to Gerald Washington versus Eren Demirezen. And I'd sort of said ahead of this fight, didn't really know how to feel about, it's a bit of a random fight. Also, Gerald Washington, you kind of never know what you're really going to get. And I sort of spoke about this on Twitter. I was finding it hard to predict this fight because on one hand you had Washington, powerful, strong, but fades in fights, and sometimes there's a question about the heart. And then you have Ali Eren Demirezen, who throws a lot of punches, but he doesn't have a lot of power, but he comes forward, applies pressure. So there's those conflicting sort of styles, and how was that going to mesh? Who was going to come out on top? And it was pretty evident that it was going to be Ali Eren Demirezen after about the second round, or the third round, I should say. First couple of rounds, actually, Washington was in this. It was a pretty cautious opening for both of them. The second round was also quite slow, but Washington actually probably had one of his, if not the best round of the fight for him. He was able to get some work away, the jab. He was catching some Demirezen with some right hands, etc. Clearly a Washington round in my view. But like I say with Gerald Washington, you never know what you're going to get and what's going to happen round to round. And I said on Twitter, he kind of feels like, in a way, he's like the American version of David Price. And it sort of proved out in this. He, from going from a really good round to round two, just started to just go downhill. The gas tank started to empty, and you could see later on in the next couple of rounds, his will was starting to ebb away as well. Demirezen wasn't doing anything spectacular, but he was applying constant pressure, coming forward, and it was taking a toll. It was really draining Washington. You could see the gas tank just emptying before our eyes. He was going to E and quickly, and by 5 rounds, he basically looked completely gassed. I think even after 4 rounds, he was looking tired. And Washington, he tried to, and I actually said on Twitter, after about the 3rd or the 4th round, I can't remember what it was, that the way that the fight was panning out to that point, with Washington having some early success, the pressure fighter then coming on, it was giving me vibes of Jarrell Miller versus Gerald Washington, which ultimately we saw a case of Miller grinding down Washington and then Washington basically quitting. So that didn't happen in this fight, but it got close because what ended up happening, similar sort of thing, the pressure and the toll of it. And these were not big shots that Demirezen was landing. He was coming in, working a jab when he couldn't, short a man by, a significant margin, but he was having success with the jab. He was just trying to look for overhand rights, throw hooks. But some of these shots weren't really landing clean. A lot of them weren't landing clean. He didn't matter if he was hitting the arms, the shoulder, the stomach, wherever he could land, he was getting his punch and his work away. Nothing big, but the accumulation effect on Washington was devastating. And the guy was just on rubber. And by the end of it, and ultimately his corner had to call it off because he was in no fit state to continue. And it was clear by round 4 or 5, this fight wasn't going the distance and that it was going to end at some point, probably Washington gassing out and being stopped. Ultimately, though, his corner did the right thing, the stoppage coming. And curiously, 2 of the judges had Washington up 67-66, and Demirezen was up by 1 point, 67-66 on another. On my card for those first 6 rounds, I had it 4-2. And I thought the rounds were relatively easy to score, but apparently not. The judges were seeing something else. But Washington gassed badly, could barely stand by the end, wobbling around the ring, and his corner really saved him some additional punishment, which undoubtedly wouldn't have been any good for him. But sad sort of ending for the fight for Washington. And I guess the kind of 2 options left now, as I see it. One is retire, and he's 39 years old. He's had an okay career, came to boxing late, managed to get a world title shot, had a couple of decent wins in the course of his career. Does he have anything left to prove? But if he does want to stay on, get some paydays, he's probably going to have to accept being a gatekeeper / punching bag and take some lower level fights against guys who are on the way up. And you could see him being matched with a Lenier, Perro or something like that. Even Victorvickers, if he ends up sort of fighting on more PPC cards. But Washington, if he wasn't done as a contender, which I already thought he was, I just thought he was a gatekeeper at this point, but Washington didn't realize he was finished. He kept saying that he was still a contender, still in contention. Those days are long gone. And for Demirezen, well, what now? I mean, we'll talk about Frank Sanchez in the other video, but I could see him being a guy that they could get in for a Frank Sanchez as a guy to get some rounds, and I think Frank Sanchez needs more of that. Maybe it won't be the best in terms of a style matchup, in terms of producing a pretty fight, a fight that's going to be action-packed, because Demirezen kind of does what Christian Hammer does to some extent, which is basically come forward, apply pressure, except Demirezen throws a lot more punches. But then again, that was a lower fight than the Sanchez fight, so not exactly like for like. But what did you make of it all? Drop a comment, loud and often, hit like, hit subscribe, follow me on Twitter, boxing_squared. I'm out.